And welcome back to the bridge. Me and my co-host Zach are back at it again, bringing another album review to you this week, a little earlier. We have moved a little bit later in the week. I think it just fits our schedules a little better. Um, so this week I've actually been super excited to talk about this album, mainly because I have a very tumultuous relationship with metal music, and this week we are covering a band called Pupil Slicer, very metal, and their debut album, Mirrors. Uh, Zach, you suggested this. You've been kind of like waiting with bated breath to find the metal album that you wanted to bring to this podcast for us to talk about.
Yeah, that's right. And there were some metal releases earlier in the year, and they just weren't worthy of. Like, I knew that you had a complicated relationship with metal music, and so I needed it to be a very strong outing from a band,
Mm-hmm.
and just so happens it comes from Pupil Slicer, who are releasing Mirrors, which is their debut release.
Right, right. I think they've done an EP before this, self-titled. I think you mentioned they worked with another band at some point as well.
Yeah, just minor work though. This is their first full-length LP as a band.
Right. They don't even have like a wiki or anything yet. I believe they're based in London though. Can you confirm that for me?
Yeah, that's right. I think Katie Davies, yeah. So I'm pretty sure she comes from the south of England. I think she's from around the Brighton area somewhere. Relocated to London to go to school. And then, yeah, the band has, I guess you could say, a London band, but she is from the south of England,
What I just mean is that this is
south of London.
another. Yeah, what I just mean is this is another one of those English bands that we're covering. We've seen to do that a lot, but I think I want to defend that before anyone even steps on it. It's like good music's going to come out of London. We're going to cover it, you know. So if we're
Well, the
and you're also in Europe, and I think you have a little bit of a pulse on kind of like that European music. But you know, this is a album. I got attention. It came from there. I don't, you know, and that's all that's important to me.
well, honestly, as far as covering music from the UK, the country has always been an embarrassment of riches when it comes to good music.
Right.
I mean, the list of good acts, legendary acts that have come out of England is endless.
Uh,
But as far as why we picked this album, I had no idea that I didn't know of the band until last week, but I was just on Bandcamp searching for something interesting, hoping I'd find a diamond in the rough. And I went to the metal section because, as I said, been eager to talk about a metal record, and seeing that this album was trending, and so went and checked it out, and my mind was kind of blown.
yeah. Okay. Um, that's interesting. That's interesting that that's where it came from. Like I say, there's not a wiki for them yet. So there's actually an article that I think I got some more base knowledge from this band from. A few things, so just a quick note, is that the creative brainchild, Katie Davies, is classically trained in a violinist. She hadn't really listened to extreme music, I'll call it, or like hard metal,
Heavy,
heavy,
heavy music. Yeah.
heavy music until later in her life. Um, but she's also got some sort of degree of autism, and she was bullied heavily, probably because of her inability to, uh, read the room and her social skills, as you probably have seen in your own life with other people similar degrees of autism. So that was immediately interesting to me to hear, and I think as we go, I think parts of the way that she constructs this music with her band kind of makes a little more sense to me when put through that lens. But we'll get to that a little bit. I think what I want to start off with when talking about this album is I think I should give context for my taste in metal and why I'm so picky and where I am picky, because I think we have kind of like talked about it a little bit. I kind of have a weird relationship with metal. I wouldn't call myself a metalhead. I don't listen to a lot of metal. There's just little pockets here and there of stuff that I've enjoyed. Caligula's album.
You did
Go ahead.
you didn't grow up listening to any metal music in high school or anything like that.
See, the metal I listened to was like new metal, like Korn and Slipknot
Hmm.
and that kind of pocket. It was never any of like the straightforward death metal stuff. Like I didn't
I
really
think
connect to that.
Yeah, I think, with our generation who grew up with new metal when we were kids, a lot of us were introduced to metal through new metal, and then some of us continued to listen to metal music and developed a better palate and really got into the genre, and then others just gave up on it when they sort of realized, oh well, a lot of this is crap.
I did a weird in between. I didn't really go deeper into metal, but I went deeper into rock, and I went
Hmm.
deeper into some more of these abstract pockets. I probably went more into the punk and emo pocket than I did the metal pocket, or the
Hmm.
post-hardcore scene and stuff like that. And then obviously I went and got into rap and stuff like too. So I didn't really engage with a lot of the metal. Some of my strict turnoffs in metal is I don't like blast beats. So that's right off the bat, like how do you do death metal with it blast beats? I don't like demon guttural vocals, and mostly because I think it comes off like so not pretentious but goofy. Like it's so intended to be menacing and dark, and like here's my vocals that sounds like a demon or something like that, and instead all I picture is the guy in high school with his battle vest and long greasy hair trying to do metal vocals in gym class, and it just kind of it comes off goofy to me. It doesn't land in like a serious tone. It just takes the edge off the whole thing to me. Um,
You find it gimmicky rather than atmospheric.
right, I do. Um, I don't like repetitive and droning guitars that you might see in some thrash outfits. It just kind of like bleeds numb for me. Uh, and which kind of bleeds into my next point is I don't like music when it's so fast and brutal that it lacks comprehensible shape and something tangible to grab onto. When it's like so much of a barrage at you that it's hard to listen to it in any meaningful way to me.
So like grindcore.
Grindcore is probably something I would struggle a lot with, yes. And in fact, I think some people would say there are parts of this album that are grindcore. But those are my big issues when it comes with like that space and metal. I prefer like defined passages, creative vocal deliveries. I like pained vocals. So there's these two pockets of like that death metal vocal scale. One is that deep guttural, and one is more throaty and squealy. And I prefer the latter. It comes off more pained and emotion filled to me. Um,
I would agree too, and maybe for a slightly different reason. Not that I terribly dislike the more garbled and menacing demonic vocals, which feature on this album very heavily. But with the other style of vocals that you get in some death metal acts, you can understand the lyrics a bit better. And not that every metal band is writing, deep and introspective lyrics, but on this record, the lyrics are quite introspective
mhm.
and quite deep, and but that's lost. And I think unless you are someone who goes and looks up the lyrics, or you buy the actual record, then there's going to be some great liner notes for you.
Right.
But you can't really get the experience of the lyrical content through the vocals that they've chosen to go with.
Um, Furthermore, I enjoy technical metal, but I only like it when it's packaged neatly and very defined and has its own space and doesn't get too chaotic. Um, I enjoy the aesthetic of metal, you know, bones, graveyards, and serial killers, violence, gore, all that. I'm fine with all of that. Um, I just wanted to go into this and start with that up front and kind of get that out of the way so the listeners understand that I'm trying to approach this in as objective as a way as I can, even though some of my comments and critiques may come from a subjective place. I'm trying to understand that it might not be my pocket, but I'm trying to find the merit and what I do enjoy in it, and how I think maybe other metalheads would approach this. Also, usually we don't talk about albums before we sit down to listen to them. And this week, I think you cheated a little, Zach, because we before we did this podcast, me and Zach were part of a group on Facebook with a few of our friends and strangers that become friends. Just like suggesting albums every week. It's just an album club. Listening to music and talking about it and getting our points. It's kind of been a big practice, really, for us to start this podcast. We were kind of doing this before, just not to an audience of any sort. But usually we don't talk about the albums before we sit down and talk about it here. But this week you decided to put this album in the album club, which means we've seen all of our comments and we kind of talked through some of our issues going into this album. Why did you decide to do that?
So for a lot of the reasons that you just explained, where you really struggle with metal music, and this album is very intense metal record. And there's a couple of, I wouldn't say metal heads, but guys who have been listening to metal over the years in the group. And so I didn't want the podcast to be us not being able to understand each other,
Mm-hmm.
because we were pretty far apart as far as metal goes.
Right.
And so I thought if I put the album in the group, then yeah, okay, it's a bit of cheating, because we're going to be sharing our opinions and perspectives and opinions about the record prior to the podcast. But we also would be able to sort of use the thoughts and ideas of our friends to sort of be moderators, so we can sort of come to a meeting on the minds here on the bridge.
It was actually a good idea. When I first seen you do it, I kind of chuckled. I was like, okay. And I kind of wondered if maybe I shouldn't comment in the group or look in the group until after we recorded this episode. I found it to be a good opportunity to use other people's soundboards and kind of understand more, because I don't know the metal genre very intimately. And some of those people there were very versed in it and was definitely able to learn more about the genre and some discussions and some history and stuff like that through those discussions. So I did think it was very helpful in helping me formulate my opinions and where I come from. So I did appreciate it in the end, even though I was kind of skeptical about your cheating.
And I didn't tell you that I was going to share it in the group before I did, and so it didn't really occur to me how it was probably a bit of a surprise to you.
Right, definitely was.
But I was just thinking of what my intention behind sharing it in the group was, and also this album is quite dense in the sense that it pulls from a lot of different subgenres within metal music.
Right,
and I knew that not the expertise, but the knowledge of a few of our friends in that group would really be able to round out some maybe more of the rough edges and blurred lines for you, and even for myself as well. It's I really started diving back into metal this week. This album really got me excited about metal, and I was going back and listening to different records from different parts of the genre.
So I think it's a good segue to get into what kind of genre is this album, would you say?
So a lot of people, it's been being reported as being a mathcore, grindcore, death metal record.
Yes, and I can definitely see some of those. For people who aren't familiar with what that means, what's grindcore exactly? What are the elements of grindcore?
So grindcore is essentially a subgenre of metal music that draws from hardcore, coming from hardcore punk, which has very short song lengths, usually sometimes even under a minute, but between the minute and a half and 45-second range, 30-second range. Some bands are crazy and make like 15-second songs, but it's this very intense, loud, aggressive thrashing of sound, and that's sort of taken from punk, from hardcore punk, and then placed within metal. And so it becomes sort of even more intense, more heavy, and especially with the sort of vocal deliveries that you see in a lot of the louder metal music. Uh, yeah, it can be quite intense.
So mixing that with death metal, which has a lot of those blast beats and that a very characteristic kind of mood and vocal style, as well as math, which is something I'm a little more a fan of, a little more uh, knowledgeable about. It was more along the types of drum passages and how they fit into the song, and it's a very meticulous process that uses a lot of different time signatures. So you mix all that together, even though I think math core and grindcore kind of are like the opposites of each other.
Well, I
They
think
are kind of mixed well, and it adds to a variety of songs throughout this album.
well the whole math core, which I haven't really experienced or encountered that term until now. I think you could generally describe it as the band using a grindcore song length format and then incorporating a bunch of different sequences of or movements within that tight time frame.
Right.
And so that's what makes it has the intensity of grindcore, but is math orientated because there are so many different sequences and movements within a short period of time.
Uh,
It's like it's a compressed form of yeah, math rock, I guess.
right, right. I feel like a little math rock and metal combined. Listening to this, I felt it was very akin to something like Protest the Hero. Uh, Blood Meat was definitely like a kind of the way that the technical aspects come into the songs and how they do little asides with time signatures and stuff. I heard a lot of like that protest in there. I also heard a lot of Code Orange in their last album, Underneath, from 2020, which I believe a lot of people in that group really liked, and I even was a fan of, but not a big metalhead. Didn't end up in like my end of the year list or anything, but if I was, probably would have. So those are kind of like more straightforward examples of the kind of like sounds if you're more familiar with those bands. Um, but going
I
into
would
the
also
so go ahead.
just to tag on to what bands you would compare them to. Protest Heroes definitely one I never thought of, and Code Orange. I think the band's last record, Underneath, it has a lot of really cool production techniques that have been that really distinguish it from the pack, and that occurs on a couple of tracks on this record. I think the that Pupil Slicer drew some inspiration from that record Underneath, and also it's been reported that Katie Davies was quite influenced by Converge, and specifically the iconic hardcore metal record Jane Doe.
Right, you sent me a track to listen to and get a kind of opinion on. Would you like to know my opinion on that track that you sent me?
Well, yeah, sure. And maybe if you can give me your opinion and how it relates to some of the more hardcore tracks on this record.
The way okay, I gave it one listen, and I'm not familiar with the band or album. Personally, you just sent me the one track. My immediate note was I really like female death metal vocals. Um, I enjoyed the vocal on the album. It's very more squealy and you know in that range that I enjoy, which is also the kind of vocals that you will hear on this album. She does a very similar kind of vocal delivery.
Yeah.
Besides that, musically, it was just it's a wall of sound that hit me from beginning to end, and I don't know what was part of it. It was just way
That
too much for me.
Yeah, so that song is not necessarily definitive of that entire album, Jane Doe, because like some of the tracks on Mirrors, the songs get more space and they slow it down and it's not so typically hardcore,
Right.
but they do go into that hardcore grindcore pocket and really lay it on with blast beats and just unrelenting guitar riffs and vocals.
Right. There was like some movements of passages in the song, but like they came and went so quickly, and then was replaced by something else in such a speed, and that I couldn't from when the song was over. It's like a minute and a half song. I don't know if I could tell you anything about the song. Is how I felt.
Yeah.
There wasn't anything lingering about it.
Would you say that that song certainly seems like it could have possibly, or that sound could have played an influence on tracks like Stabbing Spiders or Panic Defense on this record?
Yes, more Panic Defense than Stabbing Spiders, but yes, both of those tracks. Um, Let me give a little bit of context on this album. It kind of goes, it's kind of got parts to it, and so Stabbing Spiders and Panic Defense are the second and fourth track on the album, and there are some of the more shorter tracks on the album as well. They're the grindcore tracks, and probably where the definition of grindcore gets introduced into the album's description. And they're very quick. They're very fast paced. There are some like passages in kind of like things going on, but they smash through so fast and vehemently that they really just left very minimal impact on me, as much as I would just skip by them on listens. But yes, I can see how those are very compared. I could see here the song that you sent me fit snugly onto this album.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to show you that track from that album, which is considered to be an iconic record within the heavy music genre, specifically within hardcore metal. I think that album came out in 2001 or 2003.
I believe it was 2001.
And so, yeah, 2001, yeah, so quite ahead of its time. And but of course, Pupil Slicer really influenced by this record, Jane Doe by Converge, I think, and Katie Davies has said so.
Right.
And but they do their own thing with it. They've really sort of captured a sound that is unique to them.
Yes, there's I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of Code Orange here in my listening. To be honest with you, a lot of Code Orange, and especially with some of the glitchy techniques and the guitar and how it's like. It's got a little sting to it that's like very electronic in nature. I couldn't really find out what it is and how it's created, but it was the sound I first heard on Code Orange, and not being familiar with the middle genre, perhaps that's also from something else that I'm not aware of. I don't know how far the train goes, but I did hear a lot of Code Orange here, and like I said, that I would say this is very different and in its own space from the track you showed me, and I guess your point that you're making, Convergence. I would say that this is definitely its own thing from there, because it does take those tracks like Panic Defense and Stabbing Spiders, and they are like the track you sent me. What was the name of the track you sent me? Sorry.
It's the first track on the record, Concubine.
It sounds like Concubine. It sounds like a song that would fit into this album per se, but. And I didn't listen to the whole Converge album, so it's hard. I might be talking about my ass a little bit. But there's more going on here than just what was in that track, in that grindcore. Because I believe there are a lot of influences, including the math influences, that really bring a more scope to the album. But I did think it was very similar to Code Orange. Whether that be good or bad, Code Orange was a very well-received album that even I enjoyed. So to be compared to that, I think it's not a bad thing. But in terms of saying it's its own brand new thing, I think I might disagree with you.
I don't know. I think the band does more than what Code Orange does, because they draw from a broader range of influences. And so what I think about Underneath, what really stuck out to me on that record was the sort of glitchy, futuristic type of production that was on that record, and yet still remain have that sort of analog sound, even though, we're talking about electric guitars. But it still sounded like a metal record. It didn't sound like it was everything went through a machine or anything, but it had these glitchy moments, which you also get on this record at times with tracks like Martyrs and Save the Dream, Kill Your Friends.
Right. I would say it's
But
kind of industrial.
yeah, okay, that's a probably cool way to describe it. Yeah. I guess you could also say, like, on that Code Orange record, they sort of use some soaring staccatos in the guitar riffs, and this record does that too. But it does it in a way where it's more intense, I find, just because of the grindcore elements, and also because of the way that they're sequencing the songs, and the sound is changing so, like, from 20 seconds, 30 seconds, there's almost a new movement every time, and
Right.
so it doesn't ever really get caught in any sense of repetition.
Um, Depends on the track. I think some tracks are definitely what you're saying, particularly some of the later tracks. Some of the earlier tracks, I think, do suffer a bit from that, where it
Well,
does
which
feel
ones
like
do
it's in.
you, which
I would say Seven Spiders and Panic Defense mostly, and some of the more shorter
but I
tracks and the
mean,
grindcore tracks.
Stabbing Spiders is 48 seconds long.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. Like it's hard to have like even like there might be a movement or two in there, but like they don't last long enough or establish any sort of presence that they disappear is almost as quick as I hear them. And so those I would say I disagree with you with, but those points I think are valid when you listen to songs like Mirrors are more fun than Television and Collective Unconscious and Husk and even the opening track like Martyrs. All these I think are very valid in what you're saying there, but I think there are tracks on the album that do really feel well like it just a little block of noise.
Well, I mean, when you're doing a grindcore track like Stabbing Spiders,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you can't really do. It's hard to, you can only do so much within 48 seconds, so
Yes.
it's sort of hard to establish like a math core sound or a math rock sound. But I
Which
think I think on a tighter track like Save the Dream, Kill Your Friends, which is a minute and 43 seconds, I think that is one of the more mathy tracks on the whole record, actually.
right. Actually, that's an interesting thing I wanted to kind of get into. As you go through this track, and I mentioned there are these shorter grindcore tracks, kind of like almost like every second or third track is like a grindcore track that's like a minute long that kind of divides some of the longer tracks. Um, Usually, I think I would call these like interlude tracks, but they're not really. They're their own defined pocket. So the first two, you got Stabbing Spiders and Panic Defense. After that, in the middle to later, I think Vilified. I think. Let me just quickly look at the.
Vilified, yeah, is the next sort of very tight hardcore track from
Yeah.
minute 30.
Then you get I can pronounce that very well.
Interlocutor.
Interlocutor, and then the last one is Save the Dream, Kill Your Friends. It's I think the best of all of those was Save the Dream, Kill Your Friends because of what you just said, where there were more math elements brought in. It's a slightly longer track. It's almost 2 minutes, and it manages to have well defined and compelling sections and movements within the song that isn't on some of the shorter versions of those tracks I just mentioned, like the first two. Like my kind of point with Stabbing Spiders and stuff like that. If you can't create a movement or have like such a defined progress in a song, why make it 48 seconds? Why have the song there at all? Um, that's kind of where I'm coming from. Like I know what you're saying. You can't do much in 48 seconds, but then on top of that, it's like then why is it there? It's kind of my retort to that.
They want to make a hardcore song.
Right.
That's why.
It is.
And I think the album, like you were just saying, it sort of goes between these more longer math core songs where they have enough space to incorporate a bunch of different really intense sequences, and then a track where it's just intense the whole time,
Right.
and it's very very tight.
It's those
and
it's
short.
the latter tracks I struggled with the most. When they gave themselves some room, and they really played with some elements and stuff. I really enjoyed this album, to be honest with you. I enjoy Martyrs a lot. I enjoy Husk a lot. Uh, Wounds Upon My Skin I enjoyed a lot. And my favorite tracks were the 10th and 12th track, Mirrors Are Fun for More Than Television and Collective Unconscious. In fact, those last two I just mentioned, 10 and 12, I think were the absolute highlights of the album. Um,
Yeah, and for when you say that, it seems to me, and those are good songs, and I agree with you. But it's just you prefer that variant of metal.
right, that's the metal that I enjoy. That pocket of metal that I kind of referenced earlier. That's where that comes out to me, and that's where I was able to hold on to the musical ideas and really listen to these tangible things. Whereas I feel like some of the shorter tracks, and this could be obviously subjective, and I guess obviously it is, the whole podcast is subjective to a point. Um, but I just don't see the point of these super short tracks. They just they happen, they're over, and they don't accomplish too much. And I find struggle to grip onto them and pull meaning and out of them, except for Save the Dream, which I think we just mentioned, which I think was the best of all of them. I was impressed by how much math and movement they managed to fit into such a tight space. Actually, I was really
Yeah.
happy with that. Um, Seven Spiders, there is a element to that one that I did enjoy.
Can I just
Go ahead.
you brought up the end tracks, and those tracks to me, Mirrors Are More Fun Than Television and Collective Unconscious, they obviously they get away from the grindcore elements, the more hardcore elements, I would say.
Right.
And they sort of venture into this doom metal space and become more sludgy, and you could compare them to, it's like very similar to like a Black Sabbath song, they're
Right.
more brooding, and just sort of they just sort of lay on you heavier,
Let's
like
talk,
a wet blanket.
um, I don't want to jump around too much, so maybe we should focus on these end tracks a little bit. Uh, Coming to the smaller tracks and kind of my struggle with them, but it's the opposite. It's the long tracks, which Mirrors is 7 minutes and Collective Unconscious is 6.5 minutes. That I was actually kind of going into them and knowing that they were long tracks. I was actually really concerned. I was scared. I didn't know if I could really. I don't know if I could really
Can I?
listen to this long track for this long and like for how relentless it's going to be. Like I was like, I don't know. This gonna be a problem for me. But it was very
That's
quickly.
fucking hilarious.
It's very quickly into them that it kind of turned around 100%. It was like, oh, these are slowed down. This is like sludge and doom, and those are
Yeah.
pockets of metal that I'm way more interested in, and more that atmospheric kind of space where everything kind of has its
And they
place. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. And they take away the really intense blast beats that occur on some tracks.
Wait, I didn't notice that at
Which
first. So I did after.
Yeah, and also some of the stronger tracks on this record, the ones that I like the best, and I like this record from top to bottom, but the ones that I like the best, like Wounds Upon My Skin, especially, I think Wounds Upon My Skin is my favorite song, but L'appel du vide and Martyrs as well, they have a very defined bass, bass chords and bass riff, and
Hmm.
it's almost a little bit groovier. It sort of holds the song together more,
Right.
and it gives it more body, more shape, versus just, yeah, like the raw intensity of some of the louder and erratic, chaotic tracks.
Right. I found
And
that as well with the longer tracks. I thought there was well defined bass and space for that. Um,
yeah,
I got a few notes written on some of these longer tracks. I'll just kind of go through them a little bit. There's a beastly. I don't know if you've noted this in particular, and there's a lot of these throughout the album. So to mention something and expect you to know exactly what I'm talking about, might be a little difficult. But there's a beastly drum transition at like around a minute 35 of Mirrors that I really adored, because the drums come up and they take center focus and they have their own little time signature that's really good. Um, Vocals, we'll spin back to that a bit. The vocals. There's a lot of movements in the song. They get a chance to breathe, and I get to ingest them properly. The drums shine a lot. which is probably because there wasn't a lot of blast beats. I didn't notice that when I first listened, but then when I went back and listened to it again, I was like, they have some small sections of blast beats on the album, but I that's fine to me. I don't hate blast beats as an idea. I just usually hate how they're incorporated, where there's a lot of unrelenting blast beats that kind of don't have a lot of structure to them. They're just kind of like rapid fire. But here, there was a lot of structure to them. They would come in and come out. The drums would have a lot more shape, and they'd move around and have more life to them. That I really enjoyed on this track. Mirrors again is what I'm talking about. All the down-tuned guitars were good. The wailing, I think actually the down-tuned bass is what I meant. And the wailing guitars have a nice space, and it builds and creates a headbanging that like I can really get into and really enjoy. It just kind of emphasized to me kind of like what it was I did and didn't like, and then going into the collective unconscious. I noticed that they do a little bit of strumming on this that it isn't on a lot of the tracks, but they do a little bit of strumming on this one, and it sounded very Tool inspired, and maybe that's gent. Again, not good my genre classifications, but probably it was a gent guitar passage. But I kept on feeling like I was about to hear a Maynard jump into a chorus at some point, but I was really enjoying those as well. I enjoyed the rhythm at the beginning or the top of the blast beats because it was like going kind of like swaying up and down these guitar passages, and they were over top of blast beats. But the guitar gave me something to hold on to, it gave me something to really dig into, and I didn't have to like rely on the drum passage here. Every time, but yeah, that was kind of like the shapes of these songs and like their sludgy nature and just kind of like really slowing down and taking time to define what's going on. And I really enjoyed those tracks for being able to do that. And for tracks I was scared of, they turned out to be my favorites.
I like both those tracks, but I really have fond memories of the way they end Mirrors are more fun than television. It reminds me of like an old school 90s black metal song, like a Norwegian black metal song, where they use the fade out. And right. I think they fade in too on this track, but they use the fade out, and you can just listen to the guitar riff fading out, and they have a cool drum line that they're putting down. And I really like that. It was like a little nod to Norwegian black metal. And I'm not sure how influenced people in the UK are by Norwegian black metal because of the geographical proximity.
Yeah, but the end of Mirrors is probably one of my favorite. Like, it was like the 2-minute ending of Mirrors is like probably my favorite part of the album.
Yeah, it had like it was like almost a little bit sad, It had a bit of a melancholic atmosphere going on, and I really liked that. It was a nice, especially when you look into the lyrics, which are kind of quite sad and introspective and whatnot. I thought the sound on these songs were very necessary for the different types of palette of emotions that the album was trying to capture.
So yeah, this album kind of has sections, I guess you can call. The end section where it's more mathcore. Even the shorter grindcore track, Save the Dream, Kill Your Friends, which is snugly placed between Mirrors and Collective, is even more math orientated than the other ones. Then you get some of these mid-length songs that are well defined, and they bring in a lot of different elements, and they have their own passages, and they incorporate all the kind of like a little bit from A and a little bit from C to create this kind of well-defined B. You'll find that in Martyrs and Wounds Upon My Skin, and then you have the slower tracks as well. So that's kind of how this album is structured.
Well, why don't we talk about this first leg of the album? I would say the first leg is from Martyrs to Panic Defense, and then with Husk, it's sort of there's a shift.
Sure. We did kind of stuff from the back to forward, but I want to talk about the back end because that was my favorite part of the album. But let's start with the beginning, because I think the beginning of this album was my least favorite.
And is probably the most controversial from what I've been seeing online. Like, a lot of people have been saying that, and even some people who have reviewed the album, I haven't read reviews top to bottom, but I've just seen short summaries. And, people they like the intensity, but at the same time, like, it can be a bit much.
Mm-hmm.
and the album really starts off super fucking intense.
Um, it's not even Martyrs that's my problem. It's the compound of Stabbing Spiders and Panic Defense, and then
Yeah,
Lapel does okay, but it kind of gets buried a little bit in there. Um, Martyrs starts off, and I actually enjoy Martyrs because I think in terms of a palette, and which I feel like most first tracks of an album should be, or could, it's well to use them as a palette. We're showing kind of like this is what the album is. You know, this is the sound you're kind of going to be hearing as you go through it. And I think Martyrs did that extremely well to really show, to explain what this album was going to be as you listen to it. Even though there are surprises and changes as it goes, the soundscape is pretty well defined within Martyrs.
it does a good job. Yeah, it summarizes the main musical thrusts and ideas that the band are, yeah, working in.
Right. How'd you feel about Martyrs in your listens?
Yeah, Martyrs is one of my favorite tracks, and I like how it starts. It's very creepy, and it doesn't kick off right away, you know? It
Right.
sort of has like this short interlude at the beginning, and then when the music hits, it's just, it goes total hardcore right from the beginning. It's awesome.
I forgot to mention that actually. Actually, when I first put on this album, in the first 25 seconds of it was kind of like this ominous dead air. I was very happy. I was like, okay, this is good because like an album that's willing to create dead air, even though it's kind of has an ominous tone to it. Um, the ringing out. I was like, okay, good. They're gonna be aware of space, and that's what I thought when I first listened to this. Like, they're gonna be aware of pacing, and they're gonna be aware of like the strength of stopping in a metal record and giving the listener some breathing room. So that was the first thought I had when I started out with a 25-second pause. And to kind of build off this thought, they do that really well in this album, actually. Most of the time, there's a lot of pauses, and there's a lot of, even when it's not like a complete silence pause, there will be the drums and the gnashing guitars will kind of pull back a little bit, and you'll get a moment where Katie will just kind of like squeal these like very pained and hurt vocals over a little bit of instrumentation in the background. That I really enjoyed that, and I believe that's in this
Yeah,
track.
yeah, that's I like the vocals the best when they're like that.
Right.
And to speak about what you're saying about the sound, another good example about when they kill the music and just do this sort of ominous outro or intro is Wounds Upon My Skin, which is a longer track, and then the last 30 seconds of the track is a very similar ominous sound that you get on the intro of Martyrs, and then that goes into Interlocutor, which is a really intense song. But anyways, back to Martyrs.
Right, right. So that was kind of, I enjoyed that. The glitchy effects hit, and I was like, that's immediately when I compared it to Code Orange. But I was like, I enjoyed those. I like that, and I'm like, I like that that's a sound that's growing, because that's part of this metal that's kind of new that I do enjoy. So I enjoyed when I heard the kind of like the glitchy nature of some of the guitars and like the start stop of this area that kind of adds aggression as well. Um, and I enjoyed when it went grimy and guttural and slowed down, and there was breaks in it, and I got all of that in Martyrs, and so I was very optimistic for the rest of the album.
And then, however, we transition into Stabbing Spiders.
I didn't dislike Stabbing Spiders immediately, because I didn't realize it was its own song. To be honest with you, I thought this and Lapel were the same song. Now I have to go back and kind of reference that article that we read, because in there she talks a little bit about stabbing spiders, and she kind of talks a lot about, or at least in passing, kind of her bullying and the point where she had to be homeschooled at some point, and she seems to have this really complicated relationship with that tumultuous time in her life, and very pained and probably went through a lot of stuff. And Stabbing Spiders is the only song I actually read lyrically, and it's a very volatile, self-mutilation based track, Stabbing Spiders as an allusion to cutting herself. It was very dark and intense, and for a 48-second track lyrically, I thought was really compelling and added a great tone over it all. And coming out of Stabbing Spiders and Lapel Begins, uh, the only discernible lyrics I could pick out on this entire album was um, "Please tell me to stop." I believe was the opening lyric in Lapel, or "Please tell me to stop." Let me just double check that. So yeah, it comes out of Stabbing Spiders, and you can hear this repeated mantra in Lapel: "Please tell me to stop. Please tell me to stop." Over these guitar passages, and everything is super intense and like gave me like goosebumps. And I love that. So that was, in my opinion, the strongest part of Stabbing Spiders was the lyrical content and how it transitioned into the following piece. Musically, was a dud for me, but for the um, positioning and lyrical positioning and how it transitioned, I think that was very well done. And overall, I'm not too critical of Stabbing Spiders because of that ability to do that, but it is kind of a meh track to me that only really came to life after reading the article and reading the lyrics, which is something I didn't do for this album because honestly, you can't understand anything in death metal vocals. If you can, good for you. Maybe you've listened to them for anywhere, but for me, I can't understand any of the lyrics. So usually I shrug the lyrics off and don't really pay attention to them in metal. And I don't know if that's a common thing for metalheads and metal listeners. Is that something common for you?
I think it depends on the band. If like sometimes I'll read a Cannibal Corpse lyrics just for the fun of it, you know?
Right, and it's usually just gore and stuff like that. I
Yeah,
kind of have an idea
yeah.
of what I'm expecting when I read a metal lyric song. You know, it's either about fighting death or the apocalypse or something along those lines. You know, I don't usually expect to get anything very deep out of it. But I did with Stabbing Spiders into Lapel, and so I took there was a lot of merit there for me.
Yeah, so you've referenced this article that appeared in Revolver several times. Is this the one you're talking about?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, that was the one our friend
Yeah,
shared.
just in case people want to go read the article that he's been talking
Right,
about.
it's a good interview and a good article. I think it's definitely worth checking and listening to or reading rather.
And okay, so there's two things I want to say. Musically, Stabbing Spiders. I think for me, it wears a little thin on repeated listens because this album I mentioned already has staccatos. There's a lot of staccatos on this song, more so than any other track on the record, and it really, to me, it creates this sound of the way the band does it so fast, creates this sort of sound of trauma. It reminds me of like like an emergency alarm, like an ambulance or something
Sure.
almost. You know,
Yeah.
like it's evocative of that type of sound,
Sure.
and I think it reflects the lyrical content of the song. If you go to a track like Panic Defense to bridge this connection between lyrical content and sound, Panic Defense is really one of the, I would say, loudest, chaotic, and punishing songs musically on the record. And the lyrics are the only lyrics I went in and read specifically, and the lyrics are about um, sexual assault and the psychological effects it has on the victim.
Was that
And so,
Panic Defense you're saying?
yeah, Panic Defense. And
Okay.
so I think the intensity of the music reflects the intensity and conflicted emotions of the narrator in that song.
Right. With the type of vocal style, maybe we should take a side here to talk about her vocal style a little bit, because it comes off so pained. Maybe because she is a female lead, and it's kind of natural with that kind of performance. But that pained emotion with the vocals really leads into a more, how would I put this, a more emotionally drenched album in terms of expressing pain through, kind of that metal lens of like, harsh sounds and relentless uh, builds and peaks. It kind of goes along with her voice really well, and the tone that she's trying to give off, and with the lyrics that she's writing, as you're pointing out, it all kind of pulls into a nice little packet. And you earlier, when I mentioned her singing voice, you compared it to that guttural. I think maybe I misunderstood you, but you were saying that that was on this album, the guttural kind of demon vocals that I didn't like. I would disagree with you. This is the more squealy, yelpy side of that I do enjoy. So I actually didn't have a lot of issues with the vocals on this album, outside of not really understanding what's being said.
Well, that's the thing. They're garbled. They're too. You can't. I mean, you've been referencing how you think it's interesting that she's a female vocalist. I listened to the record before I looked up the band. I thought it was a guy doing the vocals until I looked up the band.
Now I knew.
And even
Go ahead.
even when I was reading the lyrics to Panic Defense, I did so while listening to the song to see if I could follow the lyrics. And at times, I totally lost the lyrics in the vocal performance. I could follow along, but then I'd lose it, and then you could pick it back up again. But it's just,
Which is kind of that's kind of what I think is inherent with the genre. It's why I think like lyrics are kind of not important. Even though, alternatively, when I did look at the lyrics for Stabbing Spiders, it added to the emotion of the track and it made me enjoy it more. But it's kind of like this weird situation where it's they clearly unintelligible of any lyrics on this album, and was a miracle that I understood the beginning to Lapel at all. But that was a little more clear than the other stuff. I just accept that with the genre, and so I don't like the sound and how it sounds when they do that guttural demon male kind of vocals that you might hear. But the sound of the more squealy, emotionally tense performance, even though they're both, not going to understand lyrics, I prefer the latter than the former. And so the latter is what's on this album. Even though the former does occur, there's some backup vocals from her other bandmates. But it's harmonized, actually. And I believe it might even be harmonized on the next track, Husk. But there's these instances where they harmonize the kind that I don't like with the kind I do like, and they even harmonize it sometimes with more spoken performances, but they're still kind of garbled.
Are you talking about like the backup vocals and the
Yeah,
lead?
they harmonize like her lead squeal kind of vocals, but the backup lyricist, I'm not sure if that's who in the band is that is, but they'll usually harmonize it, so they'll put one over on top of each other, and it actually sounds pretty cool. Like I don't mind that kind of vocals I don't generally like, but when it's kind of accompanied with this other kind and it's on top of each other, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed how it came out and it sounded.
Yeah, I think it was pretty cool too. I like those moments on the record. I hope in the future more of these backup vocals, and there are some sections on songs like you were saying where they turn the volume of the mic or the vocals way down, but so it sort of sounds like it's being sung from a distance.
Mm-hmm.
But they do actually do a bit of singing, sort of spoken vocal performance, which I also like, and especially where
I struggle with the word spoken. It's not quite spoken, but they're probably a little more understandable compared to the other lyrics. I'll just clarify that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how else you would describe it,
right,
but
right.
Yeah. So I would like to see some more of this type of vocal performance on future records if the lyrics are going to be such a fundamental part of the album experience.
Right.
Because I think it would get me more interested in the record. That being said, in the lyrics, or not the record. That being said, if I bought the record and had the liner notes, then yeah, I mean, that's different. But just as far as being able to access the lyrics through the music, I think it's a case of where the conventions of the genre get in the way of the attention and care that she put into the lyrics.
Right. I think she actually does put like some work into these lyrics, and there's a lot of like personal, emotional commentary going on there. but I could go through and I could not listen. I could go through and read what she said and get merit from that, and maybe that'll improve my listening experiences going forward. But as a piece from like being at the end of an album, those lyrics are hard to engage with.
Yeah, and I mean it's a sort of like you gotta weigh what do you want to people to be able to hear the lyrics better, or do you want to give up that atmospheric death metal sound that is sort of integral to the type of mood that the band is creating. So
I think
it's just it was an artistic choice on behalf of the band.
absolutely, and I think a lot of fans of this kind of music are fine with that artistic choice. Uh,
Yeah.
they don't mind. The voice is more of another instrument to deliver the means, right? The lyrics, in my opinion, listening to this music, I find it difficult to say that lyrics matter. And I don't know if you disagree with me there, but I feel like if there was liner notes or not for this album, I don't think that would change my opinion on it.
Well, I don't know if I would say that. Like, some bands, especially some metal bands, they'll deal with political themes. I know, especially here in Germany, there's a lot of bands who deal with, themes relating to the wars that happened in Europe during the 20th century, and put some time and care into the lyrics. So to say that they don't matter in the genre, I wouldn't go so far as to say that, though overwhelmingly, I don't think the main thrust of metal music in particular is, introspective and poetic style lyrics.
Right.
But
So
for some groups, it's important.
right. So you were mentioning Husk a few times and how you felt the album changed a little bit here. So what was it that you wanted to talk about there?
This is the first time that I think they introduced some of the more sludgier doom style elements that you'll see on the back end of the record.
Absolutely, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. And it should be
Yeah,
of
and
no surprise that when writing notes for here, I commented on how I liked this song because it had more space and kind of created more uh, emphasis on its movements, and the drums were really nice. It's like kind of repeating kind of what I liked about the later tracks, but I found it in Husk first.
yeah, and so I would say the first four tracks they don't take the time to, if they do slow it down on Martyrs or Lapel,
They,
they when they pick it back up, it's really in your face again.
right.
Whereas on
It's start
Husk,
stop.
yeah, it's start stop. Yeah, it's very sort of like jarring in that sense.
Mhm.
But on Husk, it starts off like a pretty intense song, and then they sort of have this bridge section where everything dies down. But then when they do a reprise, they introduce a doom style element, and it's this really heavy drop D bass, and the drums are not so fast, and the vocals are still very growly and whatnot.
Yeah, consistent.
But yeah, yeah. It's definitely a track that is distinguished from the first leg of the album. These first four tracks,
Right.
and draws back on the intensity a little bit.
This was probably the first. I like Murder, so I shouldn't say that. But this is probably the point in the album after getting past the opening that I was actually like kind of enjoying this track a lot. Because I do, again, I enjoy those sludgier doom elements in metal. So hearing them here, I was no surprise that I was a fan of it. And it is kind of the first time in the album that they do that. Uh, and they kind of pull back away from that later, and it comes back again in the later tracks. But it is kind of an interesting start to like the middle of the album.
Yeah, if I was gonna, I find my interpretation of the album is that it's more or less broken up into three parts. The first four tracks, then we get Husk, and then Husk is almost like it's like a separator. It separates it sort of stands alone on its own,
Mm-hmm.
but it separates two parts of the album.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get Vilified Worthless and Wounds Upon My Skin and Interlocutor. And another pretty intense section of the record, but Wounds Upon My Skin is really probably, I would say, the best track, at least for me, on the record. It really does a lot and incorporates a lot and has enough enough. It does all the best elements of the record occur on this track,
Hmm.
and then the last four tracks, Interlocutor Mirrors, Are More Fun, Save the Dream, Collective Unconscious, are sort of the mixture of grindcore and doom metal.
Right, right. So there are like, interesting. It's an interestingly paced album, honestly,
Yeah.
and I do appreciate that they do take time to stop and take a breather and deliver, more sludgy tracks on top of some of these more grindcore tracks. That really helped it become more digestible to me.
Yeah, I when I first listened to the record, like the first couple times, that when you go back to the first time I listened to it, I was like, wow, this album's nuts. It's super intense. And then when I listen to it the second time, that first little short marathon that they have at the beginning of the album, I was like, man, it's a lot, you know? And
Mm-hmm.
then I was thinking, it would be cool if maybe why did they decide to put two of the longest tracks in the last three songs of the track list? Why didn't they just take one of these songs and put them up in this up in this first leg of the album to sort of split up the intensity a bit? But after listening to it a couple more times since then, the album certainly has a progression, it has a flow
Right.
that I think logically lands at the conclusion of having these longer, slower tracks towards the end.
Right. I agree with that as well. I think they're placed well at the end, honestly.
Yeah.
Was there anything else about this album you want to talk about before I kind of get into my highlights and weaknesses? I guess.
No, that's I don't have too much more to say about the record actually.
Sure.
So, if you have anything of note you want to mention.
I just wanted to kind of like give it the kind of like the jot note version of like what I thought were the strengths of the album and what I didn't like about the album. So the highlights to me were when there were very well defined movements within a song, not just a relentless banger. There's maturity at times in opting for compelling song structure over relentless sound, and that's where I note that Huss does that really well, and so do the later tracks. I really enjoy the mathematical drum passages. I like the accented guitars, glitchy production. The vocal harmonies are all highlights to me. Some of the pacing is really well. Even though I do get fatigued listening to this album because it is still relentless, even though there are slow passages. I struggle to listen to a lot of the album in one go. I would usually listen to a
And
few songs at a
j-
time.
just to interject, this album, I also part of the reason I chose it was because it's a math record. I know you like math records,
Hmm.
and it comes in at that, tight, sweet Brandon sweet spot at 37 minutes.
Right, and I do. In terms of the length of the album, I have no problem with it. Um, it's just me and my personal listening. I had to take it step by step because of how much was coming at me at once, and for me to digest the tracks, I kind of had to repeat listens a few times over and over and try and get out of the track what I want to get out of it, which was difficult in the beginning of the album, which led to some slow starts for me, um, which would kind of transition into some of my weaknesses where I think the album opts for a chaotic mess sometimes that lacks any tangible element to hold on to. There's definitely certain passages in the album that are just too much and just shapeless in kind of a way that's just like uh, just a barrage. Um, Blast beats and the shredding guitars come at you in such speed. Even though there's like some mathematical elements, they kind of like are hard to differentiate and like pull apart because of the pacing. Um, it felt like a little bit of too many cooks in the kitchen. With there's this technical aspect and there's a lot of different places that they're pulling from. That sometimes it kind of made some of the sections of the album come off messy and not well defined, as well as some other parts of the album. Um, I think maybe I just don't like grindcore, and I you're gonna have to understand some of my critiques are probably surrounding those elements of the album. Uh,
More of the genre than necessarily the band's execution of
right,
that
right,
genre.
exactly, exactly. So if you're someone who's into grindcore, the things I'm having an issue with is probably going to slide right off your back. You're not gonna care. But these are just some things I came with. Um, I kind of said to myself after this album was over, and I was kind of commenting on kind of what was I was able to grab a hold of during the onslaught. It's like, what did I remember when the album was over? Like, what were the parts of the thing that stayed with me? And the parts that stayed with me were like those pauses in the tracks where Katie will come in and deliver these really pained vocals and sludgy guitars are behind her, and the drum passages have their little mass signature. Those stayed with me. Uh, I enjoyed some of the transition from Stabbing Spiders to Lapel that stayed with me. The glitchy effects stayed with me. Those are kind of like the passages in the later tracks and the longer tracks stayed with me, and that's kind of like what going through this album. That's the pillars that I thought incorporated my listenings.
I mean, I think the album's really well shaped because for all the things that you really like about the album, I think they lose some of their impact if you take away the intense grindcore elements, and then the album it wouldn't become it wouldn't become conventional, but it would lose it would lose that intensity that makes it special.
Right. So,
But and that's just me.
what are your concluding
Um,
thoughts on the album?
I mean, I think I've sort of described what I think of the album. The biggest, if I had any critiques of the album, is I really like the bass line on "Wounds Upon My Skin," and there's other bass lines that occur on some of these really math orientated songs that come in at that sort of 3.5 4 minute mark, and I I really hope that on the next album, because there's some really great lead guitar riffs here, but those bass lines, man, they are just so good when the bass sort of takes the focal point a little bit over the lead guitar.
Right.
And
Right.
and maybe I just really like the bass guitar, and I would like to see her do some cooler or just put a greater emphasis, a greater focus on creating some great music or writing some great riffs for the bass, because I think those are some of my favorite moments on the song.
Okay.
Not that it's a critique. It's just I really hope there's more bass because I think it's great.
Sure.
And I can't really think of anything to say I would want for them to improve on. The only thing that I'm a little bit lukewarm on is the vocals.
Okay.
I don't dislike them, and they achieve the atmospheric mood that I want when I go to a metal album. And she does have some songs where she sort of just does these monstrous growls at the end of the songs when the music dies. I think those are really cool. Yeah, I just I can't sing the praises for this album enough. Really, I think it's one of the more exciting metal records to come out in the last little while. And in fact, I seen that it's trending on Rate My Music as being within the top 7 best releases of this year, according to the ratings on that site. So
Sure. Sure.
props to the band.
So I think we're probably going to agree on what we think the toe-in song would be for this album. I would say Husk.
I would say "Wounds Upon My Skin" personally. I think
Okay.
that's the strongest song on the track, or even "Martyrs" is really good.
Right.
But "Husk" is not a bad choice either.
Okay.
I think you'll get maybe it'll give you a great an insight into what the part of the album you like the most is, which is towards the end, these longer, sludgier tracks.
Right. Yeah. Well, those are representative of the stuff that I really liked. I don't know if it's maybe encompassing of the whole album, but I would definitely suggest one of those later tracks, probably Mirrors specifically. That was probably my favorite of the two.
Yeah, yeah, I really like that song. And actually, "Save the Dream, Kill Your Friends." That wouldn't be a bad toe-in song either, because you'll get more grindcore out of that song, but it's really the song that is the most mathcore-ish, I
Right.
guess you would say.
Yeah. It's got the pacing of grindcore and the presentation of math. You know.
Yeah, and the density of math. Yeah.
Right. So what do you rate rating this album this week?
Oh man, you know, one thing I will say about this record is they kill it. They really do. And it's a debut record. It's such a strong debut release. But I also can't help but feel a little bit, especially with this super intense beginning, these super intense four tracks, that it's like a band that is they're so young and they're so full of ideas and energy, and they're just they're doing everything at once.
Hmm.
And I did get that a little bit, and but I think at the end of the day, I'm gonna have to go with a 9 on this record. I just like it too much. Like you were saying, you were having trouble getting started with the record and having to listen to it in sections. I find when I put the record on, I can't. I gotta listen to it all the way through.
Okay. Before I give my rating, please keep in mind, I'm not a metalhead. This is me trying like to step myself into the genre and really get and understand the genre and find the parts of it that I do enjoy. And I'm sure there's people out there who are like me, who have similar sound palettes that would find similar critiques. This was a 7 for me. 7, maybe an 8. There's the parts that I really liked were up there in the 9s for me. Like those last few tracks are like really really good. That would land in the 9s for me. Didn't really appreciate some of the shorter chaotic stuff. It kind of brings it down for me. A little bit of a scatter plot at some points. So somewhere in the range from 7 to 8. I don't feel too confident in like, I guess 7.5 if we're going to do that. But I don't feel super confident in one number over the other.
It's a 7. It sounds to me like you're giving it a 7.4.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't be ever able to lean to an 8.
Right. And I want people to understand that there is a subjective component to this, just because it's not quite my thing, even though I did find lots of here to enjoy. And I guess that says a lot that for someone who does struggle with metal to find and really do enjoy some of these tracks here, that it does accomplish a lot in doing that. So keep that in mind with my score. If you're more of a metalhead and you're experienced with the genre, you probably might enjoy this more than me.
Yeah, and it's a metal album that is going into some of the more intense subgenres of heavy music, and so but like you said, and I think it's a testament to the spectrum of sound and the spectrum of genres that the band works with within the metal within metal music, that there's something for a lot of different fans of metal on this one record.
Right. There is definitely like a lot. You can find something on here that you would definitely enjoy if you do enjoy metal in some capacity, like I did. Maybe not the whole thing as an encompassing piece. I think you would have to be excited and interested in all the elements that they bring forward for that to connect with you. But you'll find something. Absolutely. I could say that with utmost confidence.
Yeah, so Pupil Slicer. And the name of the band too, by the way, it comes from this surreal movie, super famous surrealist movie called An Andalusian Dog, which was directed by famous Spanish film director Louis Buñuel, and you've probably heard of the painter Salvador Dali before.
Yes.
But okay, yeah, so they made a really famous surrealist film in 1925, I think, and in that movie there's a scene where there's this really intense close up, and a person has their eyelid pulled back and a razor blade pulled across their pupil, and you see the pupil open.
Yeah. Okay. Lovely.
And so, yeah, so that's where the band gets its violent name,
I just want
Pupil Slicer.
everyone who cringed just then. I also cringed, so we can share on that.
Yeah, type in Andalusian Dog on Google and go into the images. You're bound to see it.
Or don't. I'll leave that up to you.
Yeah, it would maybe be a good background picture for people's desktop.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. There's a bunch of tracks get released today. Say we record on Friday for anyone wondering. So I'll probably go listen to a bunch of stuff. I had listened to a bunch of tracks and I just shared it on my Facebook for anyone who's seen it. Stuff that I'm kind of looking forward to. Some tracks that came out that I liked that might direct some of my future suggestions for our review. But depends on what came out. I'll have a look through.
And I just want to give a shout out since this is our first metal podcast. You know the band Panopticon because I've introduced them to you before a couple of years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been waiting eagerly for his new release, and he's essentially a one-man act who's the creative genius of the band Panopticon, and he's from Kentucky, but I think he's based out of Minnesota now. And anyways, he's releasing his new LP on May 15th of this year,
Okay.
and so it's been a couple of years in the making, and apparently it's described as one of his heaviest yet melancholic records to date. So looking forward to that, Panopticon.
All right. Well, I'll see everyone next week. Thanks for listening. And oh, by the way, if you're a metalhead and you hated everything that came out of my mouth today, all right, that's whatever. That's all I could do. I'm sorry.
Hey man, you gave the record a 7. I mean,
I did my best.
Well, I mean, you recognize that this is good music.
Yes, this is good. If you're a metalhead, I think this is definitely something you'll enjoy. That's 100%.
And yeah, so Pupil Slicer are a new band too, by the way. So before we go give the band a listen on Spotify, whatever, Bandcamp, maybe a better platform, if essentially since they're just starting out. And who knows, pick up the record if it's possible for you, if you're in the UK or Europe. I know international shipping costs are a huge pain in the ass right now for bands, and so it's really important for us to get out and try to support them as much as we can.
Right, right. And remember to subscribe, follow, give us everything, all the likes, a share. I really appreciate it.